All right. Well, Zane and Bailey, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about tires. I know personally, I've pedaled. I've ridden on plenty of different tires before, but I don't know nearly as much about tires as you two do. So I'm really excited to chat with both of you today. But Zane, Bailey, what kind of positions do you both have at Teravail? Zane, if you want to go ahead and start.
Sure thing. Yeah, Neil, thanks for having us on. I have a role as a product manager at Teravail, so I get to work across departments, engineering, industrial design, sales, and marketing to make sure we are developing the right product and work with our partners in Taiwan. Really fortunate to have this role, and I've loved it. I've been at QBP for about 4 years working on the Teravail brand. And yeah, every year it just keeps building momentum and we're learning more and more about tire development. So excited to share some of that with you today.
So I'm actually relatively new to the brand. I just started in June, so 6-ish months ago. Uh, I am an industrial designer. I've got a background in designing all sorts of different things. Um, and the main thing I guess, bringing to the table is making stuff look cool from an industrial design perspective. That's the way a lot of people think about it. I'm also trying to accomplish the highest level of functionality, the best user experience, trying to implement like feedback and research and things that we learn from getting out there and riding with other riders and all that sort of stuff too.
Teravail tires, it's a relatively new brand in the big picture of mountain bike and gravel and road tires. Give us a little background, I guess, Zane, on Teravail and how old is the brand and kind of what's your mission?
Yeah, so the brand really started hitting the market around 2015, which is a long time ago now. And back then, gravel was even relatively new throughout North America. And events were pushing people's limits, not just physically, but the limits of their equipment. And bike geometry and rim and tire compatibility were rapidly evolving. So the Teravail brand team was out experiencing these events. Athletes we were connected with were experiencing these events and finding limitations of equipment and saw an opportunity to develop a tire that had the durability of a traditional touring tire and some of the tread functionality seen in cross or traditional mountain bike tire design. So that led to the development of the Sparwood and the Cannonball tread patterns, which are still around to this day, very popular tires within our line. And that experience-driven design still exists within our development practice to this day. So that is the come from. We want to make sure that every product we're developing has a true purpose. It's delivering upon a specific experience, targeting a specific terrain. Tour Divide's a great example of a specific ride that we've targeted in a development practice. And we are still making sure, that's a big part of what Bailey does, making sure that we're delivering product that speaks to that use case. And as we add more and more product, we want to make sure that we're not adding technology for technology's sake. We give simple messaging about tire construction, tire compound, while still having the tech to back it up and deliver best-in-class performance.
All right, so before we jump into maybe the more nerdery questions here, I wanted to go over some key terms. Like I mentioned, I can understand tires a little bit, but I know that there's some important terminology with tires. So let's start with a few words. So what is the bead of the tire and how important is that?
Sure. I think that's a component that a lot of us have wrestled with when it comes to installing tires on a rim. The tire bead is what holds the entire tire carcass to a rim. And there's rigid wire beads that's commonly used across the industry for tires. Car tires especially use a wire bead. And then folding tires usually use an aramid bead or a Kevlar bead. Kevlar is kind of a brand name for aramid. And the reason steel and aramid are selected is they're super strong in tension. So under high pressure loads, it's going to keep your tire on your rim. In addition to being strong in tension, it has low elasticity. So it doesn't stretch out much when you're loading the tire or putting a lot of air pressure in it. So you have a dependable pressure vessel on that rim. So bead is super important. And I have a little tire section here. We'll see if it's visible, but the aramid is just these little yellow fibers. Not the best way to showcase something, but inside of the bead. And you can actually, if you cut into a tire, which we end up doing a lot, kind of peel them apart and see what that fiber is like.
How important is that then to setting up a tire tubeless or having your tires be tubeless compatible? And what is a tubeless tire for folks that might not know?
Oh, of course. Yeah, so that tire material is important for a tubeless tire because the bead material is very important for a tubeless tire setup because you want to make sure it maintains the interface with the rim. But it's not just that bead material, it's also the profile of rubber around the bead. So as the tire is molded, you have to make sure that you have the appropriate shape of your bead profile to interface with a rim's cross section. So you brought up what is tubeless. I guess I should have started there. A tubeless wheel system requires a tubeless ready rim, likely some rim tape to make sure it's airtight, and then a tubeless ready tire. And most of these tires and rims are called tubeless ready because nobody's exactly sure who's going to pair what with a rim or a tire, and these standards are continually evolving. So with some help with tubeless tape and tire sealant, you're creating an airtight chamber on that rim cross section, and that bead interface, that rubber profile and that bead material is a really critical component to that tubeless seal. It's not the only component though, because of course you need to make sure that air is not leaking through the tire casing itself. And I think we'll probably touch on this more later, but that's another critical component of having tubeless ready performance.
So what is the casing of a tire, and how does that differ among tires?
Tires in general have very few ingredients when it comes to the casing. It's usually nylon. And you see a lot of tan wall tires in the market today. That shows off what's closer to the natural color of nylon in tire casing. So I have an example, Rampart here. This tan color, that's nylon. It's kind of a golden color that gets covered in rubber to make a tire casing. And this casing is folded around the bead to create that complete unit or complete the wheel system and have a tire casing or carcass. And it's often coated in a very simple rubber that has carbon black in a black sidewalls case. So you have a very thin fabric, and depending on the use case, you might have more layers of casing for increased durability. Or you might have varying thread counts, kind of like your bed sheets. TPI, that's the thread count of that nylon coated in the rubber. So you can tune that depending on the target end use for the tire.
All right, how about compound? What is it, and how is it important to, say, gripping your tire to the ground?
Well, the tire casing usually has very few ingredients in it because it's trying to have as few imperfections as possible. Compound is typically paired with a given tread pattern, and you can vary the hardness of a tire's compound. That's typically how tire brands articulate the difference between their various rubbers. That hardness is measured as a durometer on the Shore A scale, and a softer durometer or a lower number for a durometer is a softer rubber, and you'll often find a softer rubber on the shoulder of a tire. So the shoulder features are meant to conform with the terrain, especially in mountain product. So having a softer rubber allows for that, and it's actually easier to bond to the surface that you're touching as a softer durometer, and that can lead to premature tire wear. But while you're using the tire, it has more grip. So that's the trade-off everybody's playing with. And if you use a harder durometer, you often have more abrasion resistance. It's going to be a tougher, longer lasting tire, slightly faster rolling, but you sacrifice that compliance and opportunity to grip. That's what's most commonly tuned, but it does not end with durometer and hardness. There are other things you can tune to improve abrasion resistance or wet grip. And again, that's category by category, honed in the development process.
Okay, so maybe a few things that can help with gripping. Some words that come to mind: siping, horseshoe. What are some key terms? Is it it's siping, right? Not seat.
Yeah. It's saying it's okay. It's spelling it that I struggle with that.
Yeah, exactly. What are some key terms as far as that's concerned, like tread patterns and stuff like that, that people see on when Teravail, like on your website and stuff like that? Sure. Just so that people can understand what you guys all mean by that.
Well, with most tires, before we talk about tread features, we usually break up a tire design into different zones of the tire. There's the contact patch where any given tire interfaces with the ground. And obviously this changes as you turn or load your tire in different ways. So we have different tread features in different zones across your tread cap. So you have the central contact patch, you have a transition area, and you have a shoulder of the tire. And tread features can vary between all those regions on a tire. And you brought up sipes. Another important term would be ramping, we have some characteristics that are consistent throughout our line. That's something Bailey does a great job of. Ramping is one of those, and we have directionality typically in our tires. We want to make sure our tires fit the familial look, but actually have function, so we don't have features for feature's sake. So I would say ramping on the leading edge of our tires, directionality, and you'll often see sipes or grooves. So sipes are intended to make sure that tread features can move in the direction they're intended to maintain grip with the surface of the ground. And the grooves or channels between lugs are intended to create room as you're riding over loose media, making sure you can evacuate that stuff and let the lugs work and bite into the surface beneath you. Bailey, do you have anything you want to add to the visual characteristics of Teravail tires or tires in general that you think would be meaningful?
I do think that sometimes looking at like horseshoe as an adjective or a descriptive word, I think sometimes the words that get used definitely come about during the development process, just so that like internally we can all establish a common vocabulary so that we can talk about the tires and talk about like what we're trying to achieve and determine whether or not we're achieving that. So I think it's kind of interesting because it is one of those areas where you do get like, I think siping is a really technical word, and then like you start to move along a spectrum where like something called like a horseshoe or I don't have any other examples floating around in my head right now, like start to be more designery or even more marketing
Right.
speak. So I think tires are an interesting space for determining what is function and what is flourish on the tread.
Okay, good to know. I like it. All right, so we have those keywords defined, so that should help us get through the rest of this chat. And I appreciate that. Take us through the process of a tire. Like, how is it born? What are you guys doing? Are you sitting around like brainstorming, or are you literally riding other folks' tires? How is a tire born?
Do you want me to take this, Zane, or do you want to go?
I think I will tee you up because I think Bailey has a lot of depth of knowledge with regard to how we like really hone in on what's an appropriate design. But to your point, we're always riding different tires that we've identified as relevant benchmarks or industry leaders in the category from feedback provided by athletes and friends like yourself. And that gives us a good foundation where we're still validating, like the beginning of this presentation, we talked about making sure that any project we kick off is delivering on a specific terrain and experience and not just a tire to be a tire. To make sure that that opportunity is legitimate, Bailey does a lot of design exploration and selects feedback from the field. So I guess I'll hand it off to you now, Bailey.
This is an interesting space just because you talked about like how I got into tires, and the part that I left out about my background, even though I'm new to QBP, I've been riding bikes since like 2002-ish and working in shops since like 2006. So I do have a lot of pre-existing knowledge, which at times can be useful, but also at times when you're trying to develop a new product and something that's actually innovative or useful, it takes some decent effort for me to separate my opinions from like the experience that other people are looking for, that other riders want out of their tires. So really that's like where my part of the process kind of starts. Like once we know generally where we're aiming, I try to pull from those experiences and add to those experiences just in like ride testing. Sometimes the ride testing is more intentional, like based on what market we're looking at, but also just because we can work remote nowadays, which is super awesome. I spend a decent amount of time outside of Minneapolis, so riding here on trails that are unique in their own way. I used to live in Colorado, so spending a lot of time out there, spending time in like Utah, the desert, spending time in the Pacific Northwest, like all these areas that have very different terrains and very different use cases, specifically for mountain biking for me. And I've always got like a quiver of tires that I bring with me to test on those terrains. And then at the same time, I'm looking at what other people have on their bikes and just trying to like, in one way or another, record and document that. So that's like really like the start of the process for me. And then sometimes like moving from there, it's up to me to like process the information and decide if it's a matter of making minor adjustments to something that we already see on the market that's working really well and just making it our own, or if we want to start from kind of a blank canvas. And at that point, do basically just a lot of sketching, just 2D, like pen on paper, or sometimes a digital pen on digital paper with like an iPad. And just a lot of that is really interactive, like in our Teams chat, sending it to Zane or the engineers that I'm working with to just, move things around, sometimes a millimeter or two at a time, and other times crumble the paper up and throw it away. So that part is super fun. It's definitely more of a generally quantity of ideas, getting them out there as quickly as possible. And then from that, we move on to 3D modeling and get into more 3D space where you start to have to do a lot more math and space things out correctly and see what it looks like on different size casings and that sort of thing.
So the design process, Bailey, you're literally just drawing that out from like an idea that you had that might work based on your experience riding trail.
Mm-hmm.
And then you send that off to the engineer, and what do they say? Oh, this might be realistic, or this isn't going to work because of so-and-so reason.
Yeah, definitely. And there's different things that will influence that, right? Sometimes it's their experience too, because I mean, we're a bike company, so most people that work here have spent a lot of times on bikes and have that information, but also just the manufacturing experience that our engineers bring along in terms of knowing like what angles we need to like be able to get the mold to fill correctly, or there's different ways of like controlling how much rubber you use to control the weight of the tire or like the feel of the tire. Like you don't want to have like this awesome super light casing and then a design, a knob design that will lend itself to having a bunch of extra rubber in there. So because you'll then ruin the effect of having that awesome super light casing.
How long then does the process take from you designing something and putting it on paper and then actually getting a product in hand to test out? And then how many products, how many designs are you getting? Is it just one, or are you getting a variety of different types of designs within that same idea? How does that all work?
Yeah, I can speak to that pretty quickly here. So Bailey talked about how we'll gather feedback from riders or his own experiences, and we might even have some design boundaries provided by engineers that help inform tread design direction in 2D. And the overall length of the project will depend on if it's a ground up design or say we're scaling another tire. So I have some examples of 3D prints here. Typically scaling a tire does not take quite as long. So we do 3D powder prints. This is a Rutland tread, if you recognize that. Yep. And we had a project where we had to scale it into a larger size. A project like that could take 12 to 18 months, well, pre-COVID times. And if you have a project that's more of a ground up design, you might budget in an extra year because, like you said, are you testing just one design or you're testing a few designs? Sometimes we want to push the limits and test a theory about a tread spacing or tread pattern that we've seen trends of with benchmarks, but we're not sure how far we can take it. And the only way to truly do that is cut a mold and get out and ride tire samples. So that's something we're really excited about. It's something that we did with the Warwick development project where we're able to push some boundaries and budget for that R&D time and back-to-back testing. And we actually went back, scrapped a mold, and iterated upon physical tire samples. And that's not a luxury we had early on when we needed to get product to market.
How many refinements did that take for you guys to dial in the Warwick?
Yeah, so 2D refinements, I don't even have a quantity. Like Bailey said, there's so many different sketches and back and forths. 3D prints, I'd say it's easier to quantify in time. We probably had 4 formal design reviews where we had 3 to 5 concepts that we're narrowing down each time. And then the physical samples of the tire, we had 1 refinement once we had the final mold cut. So we had that chance to do some field validation around the country, understand where it was limited. It was front traction limited on the initial mold. And we're able to move some lugs around, adjust not only lugs, but casing layups, which is something you could do more easily than to change the tread spacing. And cut a secondary mold. So I think if you break it into chunks, 3 months of 2D refinement, 3 months of 3D refinement, and then a year of back-to-back testing and molds being cut.
So I guess how long did the Warwick take from start to finish?
It's about 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually, I would think it might be a little bit longer. Bikes, it takes.
It might be if we look at a calendar. I have a positive memory. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I'm just like, 2 years, right? Could have been a little bit longer.
Sure. And then I'm sure you all had to wait for, the supply chain issue for them to actually be available and all that as well.
That's a good point. It might have been 2 years to cut the initial PO, but when does it show up? Yeah, that's a different story.
Let's take another tire, the A-Line. That's a really popular tire that you all have. Tire I really enjoy riding. It's a good rear tire for me. I like A-Line in the rear and the honcho up front for just regular trail riding. But what are some determining factors that go into the design of the A-Line? For example, like the durability, the grip. Did you want to make that tire just like a perfect all-around tire? Did you want to make it a fast tire? What are some, like rolling, cornering, all that? What are some determining factors that go into, say, the A-Line that made that tire a pretty darn good tire?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that example. That was a little before Bailey joined, but he can likely add on to this pretty quickly. The A-Line was designed after benchmarking a variety of fast rolling tires. So like you called out, what was the original intent? It was to create a fast rolling tire that still could provide confidence when you leaned it into a corner. And that's pretty evident when you look at the spacing of the tread design. The center of the A-Line has a lot of rubber, and the lugs are relatively closely spaced. However, there's significant difference between the front and the back of each one of those lugs. So where you have the most pressure on that tire, you have a lot of ramping. So the leading edge allows for a fast rolling tire, and the back edge is a very sharp cutoff. So you have a sharp braking edge on the back of the tire. That's something that's really important for a fast rolling tire, to have a consistent surface and braking edges where you need them, but not creating drag when they first interface with the ground. It's still a fun rear tire. It can be a little bit drifty, which I enjoy with the A-Line as a rear, and that's because the transition space is very open on that tire. So that when you're rolling in a straight line, you're just contacting that central rail, and then you start to initiate a corner, you have that transition space over to those burly shoulder lugs, and you can maintain your control once you initiate the drift. So that was based on benchmarking other competitors in the field and then testing various constructions. And there's some differences between the different sizes of the A-Line as well. That's part of the scaling process.
One thing that like bike packers always look at for, say, I don't know, riding the Tour Divide or something like that, or the Great Divide mountain bike route. More people do that anyways. How important is this continuous center tread? Like the A-Line, I think would be actually a pretty darn fun, Great Divide mountain bike tour, Great Divide mountain bike tire, just because it's, what you're going to get. It's a little bit more burly, but you still want a tire that rolls really well. And I hear different things throughout the industry, but and look at different tire designs, and people are saying this design is the best for rolling because you're almost always rolling straight instead of cornering. So how important is having those center treads tightly spaced together, or is it just the ramping that's more important?
Oh, it's such a good question. And we have some development projects related to this for future Teravail tires. On the A-Line, it's important that we have that ramping because we have such tight spacing. But without the open transition, it might not be as fast rolling. So you're staying on that robust central, blanking on my words here, but we have that central contact patch and those ramped central lugs. There are still fast tires that have well-distributed lugs across the tread cap. And that's because the tread alone does not influence your rolling resistance. So casing and having a supple casing can reduce your rolling resistance. And I'm getting a little bit out of my depths here. Our engineer could speak to this with more depth, but you can have a fast rolling tire that doesn't have a rail in the middle. So it's always that combination of casing, tread, and compound that creates a fast rolling tire. And on the A-Line, since we went in the direction of a fast rolling central contact patch, we needed to make sure we had those ramps. So we had a smooth transition in the contact patch.
Talking about trail conditions, like what makes a tire work really well in wet conditions versus really well in loose, like kitty litter conditions that are dry?
Bailey, I don't know if you want to tackle this based on some of your more recent testing. You've been taking it to the extreme most recently.
If you're taking like one tire tread and switching the compounds, I would say I noticed those differences a lot more than like comparing really similar tire treads. I think that depends on the terrain, but if you think about like riding like slick rock stuff in Moab, like you can really feel, I mean, obviously the compound's doing all the work there. So that's just a good extreme example. But then going to like the Pacific Northwest, uh, where the trail conditions are much, much more variable, like because there's like wet and slimy roots and dirt and then sticky rocks and then mossy rocks, like all in like 10 feet of each other. And then like if it starts raining, all the slime gets washed off the top. So like all of a sudden it becomes like a different trail. And in that case, like the knobs almost feel like they don't matter, like as long as you just have like the softest rubber possible. Once you move away from compound, the easiest way for me to think about what the actual lugs on the tire are doing and how they're interacting with the surface or the riding media is basically like thinking about like the size of the gap between each lug, and then the size of the media that you're riding on and like how much you want to be able to grab it. Like, so those roughly should like smaller media like sand would generally you would want or need a smaller gap between lugs. There's outlying instances where that's not totally true. And then if you think about like, again, loam in the Northwest, like just having like a big spiky tire to grab onto that as much as possible and still be able to evacuate anything that's sticky is useful. But yeah, I think that's kind of the easiest way to describe the difference between tires and their intended trails.
Generally speaking, would you say then, softer rubber would work well or better in wet conditions, and a harder, firmer rubber is going to last potentially a little bit longer in, say, a slick rock type condition?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think this is one of those things where like going between, like for me, just in doing research, like exploring different areas is super beneficial just to help me adjust my thinking. Where riding in Colorado, I would always prefer, even though it's less grippy, I would prefer a harder rubber compound just because there's like mega razor blade sharp rocks everywhere that are trying to ruin your tire. Like, I feel like I went through like 15 tires last year. Like, so I would rather just have something that lasts for as long as possible and is going to let me ride and have fun, and is not going to wear out. Where like going up to the Northwest, like I've got friends out there that are on the same set of tires for 6 months and it looks brand new. Yeah. And they can spend money on the soft, nice compound and like not have to worry about it getting ruined. So outside of performance, I always like have to think about like what gets people the bang for their buck and lets them have as much fun as possible.
Let's move on to width. Is there any specifics like industry standard as far as width? Like I know that all of these tires are not actually made in each individual warehouse or each individual factory. A lot of them are made in the same factory. So how do you define each tire width, and how do you kind of figure all that out, and how do you make sure that they're actually the width that you say the tire actually is on, say, the sidewall?
I'm going to break that into a few answers. On the front end, you're asking about a tire standard or a standard for compatibility with rims. And there is a standard related to the range of rims that you can reliably and safely fit a tire to. Refining the tire rim pairing within that range and getting the optimal profile is something that tire brands spend a lot of time on, making sure that that casing profile not only measures the way that you anticipate, but positions the lugs where you want them for a given use case. So that is an area of development. So we're always measuring and testing tires on different rim sections as rim profiles are continually evolving and preferences are changing within categories as we learn more and more about tire development. When it comes to our target size, it can be difficult to predict exactly the size of a tire that's going to come out of the mold. And we typically bias towards slightly under the labeled size because tires stretch out a little bit over time. And you can adjust that profile with a wider rim. So we're always targeting the same size once the tire is stretched out at the recommended PSI, the same size as is labeled on a tire. But if you're going to err one way or the other, you typically want to be slightly under that size so you don't have interference with anything on the bike. And the actual design target size is molded into any tire, the ISO size. So that's a good way to double check. Does this ISO align with the labeled size that I'm seeing on my calipers? And if not, maybe there's a different rim recommendation I could use, wider internal.
What would say like a 2.35 inch tire? What would you suggest be the ideal rim width paired with that tire?
I again think it depends on the category to some extent. I-30 is a very safe answer here across the board. But there are instances where you want to square off that tire profile. Maybe you want to engage those shoulder lugs earlier in a turn. So being able to tune that profile for your ride experience is something that I think is really fun about wheel and tire design.
So when you say square up, are you saying running a wider rim and it basically squares up the tire profile, or narrower rim?
Thanks for clarifying that. So when I say square up, I am talking about putting the same tire on a wider internal rim width. That will elevate the shoulder lugs and it'll change the ride characteristic of the tire. Historically, Teravail has had very rounded, tall tires, which has allowed us to maintain compatibility or really positive ride characteristics on wider rims. So if you wanted to flex up into a wider rim, you can do so and have a stable tire and without just over squaring a tire or putting it on too wide of a rim. And in that case, you have a lot of rolling resistance.
I've always wondered, like, is there a set rim width for a set tire? But it seems like it's kind of open to interpretation a little bit.
I guess one thing I would expand upon there is we do have what we determine to be an optimal range for each tire. And that's something that we're always developing. Once the first tires come out of the mold, we're checking on a variety of rims and we say, all right, these are the range of rims where we think this profile is suitable. And then you can tune within that range based on your riding preference.
So I tested a tire not long ago, actually, as a new tire company. It came with a wobble. I installed it.
Yep.
It had a wobble. And then I uninstalled it just so that I could basically reinstall it to make sure the tire bead wasn't getting hooked up on any like gunk or anything in the rim. So I guess this might go back to how it's made or something like that. But why does that happen in tires? I know it happens probably with every brand, but why does it happen?
Yeah, bicycle tires are unique to car or even motorcycle tires in that they're very handmade. The casings are a lot thinner and there's a lot of manual steps as we apply different plies. That's the layers of casing for sidewall protection. And within this process, it's easy for a component to be misaligned before the tire goes to the mold. And as you mentioned, this is something that impacts most bicycle tire manufacturers. It's very difficult to inspect for because you usually won't notice it until it's mounted up on the rim. So the typical inspection measures, which every tire is thoroughly inspected for most factories and most brands, can't pick up how this tire is going to mount on every given rim. And once a wobble is identified, you can improve it by going back and looking at the process of manufacturing and identifying problem areas. But there's not just one step within the hand layout process that causes it. So that's why so many brands continue to struggle with it, but are increasing the level of automation in the manufacturing process with time. And you'll see a reduction in casing wobble. That's my projection as in the coming years, as tire manufacturing becomes more and more automated.
Hopefully that's the case.
I'm
into that for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the warranty customer service folks are also happy with that.
Yeah, I would think so.
All right, so maybe another issue that you would find in a tire. I've got a few tan sidewall tires, and it seems like, and not necessarily just tan sidewall, but I find that some of my tires just weep. So the sealant falls through the sidewall. It's like almost sweating, it looks like. So what's the reason behind that actually happening? And is tan sidewalls more susceptible to that or not? Is that a myth?
That is not a myth, although it is more apparent when it's happening on a tan sidewall. You have a little bit more contrast. Tan sidewalls don't have carbon black in them. Carbon black is black, and it's commonly used in black sidewall tires. You substitute silica, which has a larger molecule size. And that means if you have larger molecules, it's easier for things to sneak between them. And those things could be air. They could be one of the components of the sealant. The clear component of a lot of tire sealants is glycol. And that over time works its way through a tire's casing. And you can fix that by refreshing your sealant, but you are going to continue to see some weeping in the tire, especially as it wears. As you continue to flex the tire's casing, you're delaminating that nylon fiber that's encapsulated in rubber from the rubber over time as the tire breaks in and wears. So once a tire is weeping, that'll continue with that sealant. Sometimes latex sealants can be good at creating a bit of a boundary layer to eliminate some of that weeping. But yeah, that's the primary reason. And because of that, some brands even use a layer of carbon black on the inside and use tan just as ornamental on the outside of a tire.
Okay, so, interesting.
Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and that actually brings up my next question. What, so if you added that extra carbon black on the inside, I'm sure that would add some extra weight. So when we publish, tire reviews on BIKEPACKING.com, we all talk about weight. Like everybody comments like, "Are you kidding me? This weight, this is way too heavy," or "This is impressive. It's light." It's probably the number one talking point. So how important is that to you all when you're designing a tire? That weight versus durability standpoint.
At the beginning of the conversation, we talked a little bit about the different constructions we offer within the Teravail brand. And I think that's a pretty important piece of the discussion. So within any given tread pattern, you have performance expectations. So with the Warwick, we know this tire is going to be designed for heavy trail use. And in certain conditions, people might bias towards a lighter weight casing because they know they're not going to need that reinforcement, that puncture protection, that sidewall protection. In other applications, people are going to want a reinforced ply puncture protection. And that's going to have a dramatic impact on the tire's weight, more so than the tread pattern alone. So tire weight is not always a bad thing, especially when you're looking for some stability and strength. Bailey can probably speak to that, and you can too, being in Colorado. But we always look to provide a spectrum of tire weights that fit the target category of products. So yeah, Bailey, I don't know if you want to expand upon that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would add to that is just it's another one of those, like in my kind of research explorations, it's a good thing to record for me just because like as an individual, I definitely err towards running heavy tires, generally heavier than necessary, just to avoid either damaging my rims or ruining a tire sooner than possible. I mean, I'm taking the same bike on a lot of like long distance trail rides that long distance being like a day mountain bike ride, not bike packing. But the same bike would go to the bike park. So I need to have it set up for both those things. And again, like riding my bike somewhere other than Colorado, like coming here to Minneapolis and riding the trails in town here, I now have Teravail light and supple tires on my bike, and it feels awesome. It's super light, super fast. It basically rides like a BMX bike now instead of a mountain bike. And like doing things like that, just like side by side testing, like on same bike, same trail, really helps kind of reframe my thinking and understand, like I'd said earlier, what different people are trying to get out of their bike by doing different things to it. I don't know if that helps add to it, but that's kind of my perspective on the weight.
Absolutely. I'm kind of right in the same boat with you all. I mean, I get it. Like the light and supple, that supple ride quality. It's hard for me to quantify having that feeling versus having a tire that I know is going to last a little bit longer, that I know has more flat protection. That's what I always tend towards going towards, but I know other people really like the supple ride. Do you guys design like these light and supple tires for folks that really like that light and supple ride quality, or is it just you have two main types of compounds? Or not compounds. That's casings, right?
Yeah,
casings. Yeah.
You swung. You almost got it.
Yeah. I'm good with it. I think it's worth highlighting the Kessel, because with the Kessel, we don't even have a light and supple option. And I think for the tread pattern, you can understand why. Yeah. The intended use case is quite extreme. But when you go into some of the lower lug or faster rolling tires like the A-line, maybe with bike packing applications, you want that durability. But if you're just ripping around your local trail and there's not a lot of hazards, you don't live in the front range, you just want a lightweight tire. So the tread pattern can be a filter, and then we want to have that selection for people who are looking for a lighter weight wheel, because that can be a lot of fun to ride if you have the right terrain.
Let's get into some just quick questions to finish up here. I know we've gone pretty long here, but it's been like tons of information, and I appreciate this. So what is both your favorite non-Teravail tires?
Mine is there's a BMX bike over there.
Yeah.
The KHE was like the Max Street tire. They had like a park version too, but it was like the first, or at least one of the first, like super lightweight, like high thread count BMX tires. And it was insane to put on a bike, like when you're used to like an old, like thick Primo wall wire bead tire that weighed as much as the bike, and then you put what is basically like a road bike tire on there. And it sounds like a basketball when you land with 100 psi in there, and like it just rolls forever. And it was like such a game changer. I mean, I went through a lot of tires doing that.
Sure.
Riding a super lightweight BMX tire on street, like they exploded all the time.
Yeah.
But it was fun.
Yeah, and this time of year, up in Minneapolis, I am a big fan of some studded fat tires, but in tires that are more summer use. I'm going to use kind of a cheating answer here, because I'm really interested in riding a tire that I haven't spent a lot of time on yet, and that's the new Specialized ground control. I think the conversation we had earlier today about can you have a fast rolling tire without that rail in the middle? Well, the ground control speaks to that. And I think that is a really smart tread pattern. And you can see the way that Specialized has used that tire up and down their line in a really versatile way. So that's something I'm eager to spend some time on. And I think in general, they have some pretty compelling tread designs. The Fast Track's another one that we rode in the development of the A-line. Yeah, I'll give some ups to Specialized. But in general, there are so many tire brands that are crushing it. So it's so fun to try a variety.
Awesome. All right. How about your favorite Teravail tire? Or I guess 45 North tire if you're loving 45 North right now.
Well, it's the time of year. It's
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so for Teravail, I really enjoy the Rutland, because when I'm riding drop bar, I like venturing into single track, and I feel that the Rutland does a great job of that. It still feels relatively fast on road, but I don't feel limited by my tread when I'm riding the Rutland, and I think that's a great experience. So that's my answer.
I like the Honcho. I've got one of the 2.6 big balloony boys on the front of my mountain bike right now. It's just super fun compared, especially being like here on like smoother, faster, turnier terrain than what I'm used to in Colorado. Like it basically feels like a giant BMX tire. Like it's got like the super predictable like casing and tread profile being like almost similar, and then like nice close spacing on the knobs, but still has some grip. Like, and then having the super light ones on my bike, like I said earlier, it just makes it super fun.
What would you pair with that in the rear?
I've got an A-line on the rear.
Okay.
I almost want to try like a Honcho both front and rear.
Mm-hmm.
In general, like me as a rider, like I care a lot less about my rear tire. Like I feel safe on almost anything. But it'd be cool to experiment with just like two of the same exact tire, because that's not a traditional setup.
So what is the most popular Teravail tire, would you say?
That's pretty easy. It's the Cannonball, but the Washburn's coming for its money. The Washburn is growing in popularity at a rapid rate, because people are really appreciating that smooth ride feel. So yeah.
I love that Washburn. It's money. You guys have really built up the lineup in the past few years, from gravel to, I would say, trail riding to even more enduro riding now. So what tires, if any, are planning on or have ever been discontinued? I don't think I've seen any yet. And what else is in store for this year? And have you ever considered redesigning a tire that's already launched, or would you just put a new name on it? Three questions there. Sorry.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
It's all good. So we have discontinued tires or constructions of tires. Right now, the Kennebec and Cumberland, you don't have active production going on, but that lines up nicely with one of your other discussion points there, the opportunity to redesign. And I think the Cumberland has some really positive characteristics that we don't have captured anywhere else in the product line. So we are looking at current product lines and looking for opportunities to redesign now that we have this big foundation. And on top of that, now that we have this foundation of product, we're looking at opportunities to use new materials. Everybody wants a lighter weight tire if it can be durable, and other unique layups or materials that people aren't using in the industry today. That level of refinement is the path forward for the brand. And yeah, excited to have folks like Bailey on the team now to make sure we're heading in the right direction.
I'll kind of add on to that a little bit. Just like Zane said, we've got a line that's built up in a way that we can make more incremental changes to existing tires. Speaking to the design process, like some of that is like literally just taking, like, we've got a honcho that we did some clipped some of the lugs on there, like just to see how we could affect the ride, or how that would affect the ride. Like that's a normal part of the process. Doing that with other competitors' tires too, just like the quick and dirty prototyping. I think on top of that, like just working on our design process as a whole too, and how we like implement those changes and what level of changes we need to make. And then finally, and realistically, I think most importantly, like trying to interact with riders as much as possible in different areas. That I think that's been really important, just because it leads to pretty distinct insights. Like there's obviously like just a lot of like kind of an overall wash of information, but really just like getting out there and being at trails or like at races or at events or whatever is like so useful to the design process, because there's like, you could either have me in my living room here sitting at my desk just like saying ideas at a piece of paper, or like getting out there and actually like absorbing information that I can process and turn into sketches. That's much more useful. So that's what you'll be seeing more of downstream.
Final question. Who's the lucky person that picks the names? I mean, all of the names are really cool. The Washburn, isn't that named after the town of Washburn up in northern Wisconsin there?
You got it. Yeah, picking names, I don't want to say it's the best job. It's fun though. Picking is fun, but deciding on one with consensus can be quite the challenge. Fortunately, neither Bailey nor I lead those efforts. Sure. Steve does. Steve, the marketing manager of our team. But there's a lot of team contributions. There's some ideas that are a little bit out of bounds at times. So yeah, those are usually the more heated discussions. I'm sure you could relate. When you try to name something, whether it's a dog or a tire, it's a big deal.
It's got to fit that tire too. It's got to be like the perfect name. I'm sure people lose sleep over it.
Yeah, I definitely wrong. I have no examples right now that I can provide, but I'll in like the development phase have like my own code names for tires, just that like it helps me think about them in a different way, like rather than just like having some weird part number where it's like a non-thing. Like it's nice to give it some personality, and it makes it more fun.
That was an hour of talking about tire nerdery, and I learned something, that's for sure. I learned a few things. So Bailey and Zane, I just want to thank you for joining us today. For folks that are watching, if you want to head out to Teravail.com to check out Teravail's lineup. Thank you all so much for joining me, and we'll chat with you soon.
Sweet.
Thanks for having us. It's great.
Thank you.